Okay, time for another video in the Shakespeare series. This one is on Othello. The portrait that you see here by William Mulready is the actor Ira Aldridge playing the role of Othello. Aldridge was the first black actor to play the part back in the 1820s, 1830s. On the one hand, one might look at his performance as a positive step toward racial diversity and equality in professional theater. And many at the time, including Aldrich himself, doubtless saw it that way. But on the other hand, the character of Othello plays into negative stereotypes about African peoples promulgated in early modern racial discourse and ideas that can be traced back to Shakespeare's time. The contemporary African-British actor Hugh Quarshie, who has played Othello on stage, recently remarked, and I'm quoting him here, "If a black actor plays Othello, does he not risk making racial stereotypes seem legitimate and even true? Of all the parts in the Shakespearean canon, perhaps Othello is the one that should most definitely not be played by a black actor." It's an interesting comment. Okay, there's the title page of the 1622 quarto. The play was, in Shakespeare's lifetime, it was known simply as The Moor of Venice. Its first recorded performance was at Whitehall, so it was a court performance in late 1604. But it would be revived several more times throughout Shakespeare's career. So it was apparently a popular play, but it was not published in any format until 1622. And it's the only play to make its first appearance in print in the years between Shakespeare's death in 1616 and the 1623 folio. The quarto was printed by Nicholas Oakes for Thomas Walkley. And it has the distinction of being the only early Shakespearean quarto to demarcate act divisions as well as scene breaks. This was a practice, the dividing of a play into act, a practice that began only after the King's Men started performing indoors at Blackfriars around 1610. And the purpose of the act divisions was completely pragmatic. It was to indicate intermissions during which candles would be changed out to keep the stage illuminated during performance. So, despite being published only a year after after Walkley's quarto edition, Jaggard's folio contains hundreds of substantive variations from the quarto text, including the addition of some 160 lines or so. New to the folio are Desdemona's singing of the Willow Song. That's Act 4, Scene 3. An extended version of Desdemona's "What Shall I Do to Win My Lord Again" speech, which is a scene earlier in Act 4, Scene 2. And then Amelia's speech on marital infidelity, delightful speech, in Scene 3. Some scholars, but by no means all, there's no consensus on this. There's very little consensus on many of Shakespeare's early texts, but some believe that the folio text may actually be closer to Shakespeare's original, with the quarto being a later version edited down to shorten the performance time. So here on the left is the quarto, 1622, and we're looking first at Desdemona's "What Shall I Do to Win My Lord Again" speech. And on the right, you can see that same speech, now with a significant addition in the 1623 folio. And rather than having you read that early modern printing, I'll put up a transcript here. I'm not going to read it now. I'll let you pause if you'd like to read it, and then we'll come back and look at this speech and the next one I'm going to show you later in this video. So another illustration of the difference between the quarto and the folio on the left is, again, the 1622 quarto. This is Emilia this time. Just 2 lines there, and then I put an arrow there pointing out Act 5. That's one of the act breaks in the quarto. That's actus, given this Latinized there. And then on the right is the longer speech as it appears in the 1623 folio. And again, I'll put up, I'll overlay a transcript here for you if you'd like to read it. I love this speech, and we'll take a look at it later in this video. So complicating the debate about the source materials for the 2 editions is the careful expurgation of profanity from the folio. The quarto text contains numerous instances of religious language of a kind that was targeted in the 1606 Act to Restrain the Abuses of Players, which prohibited performers from, and I'm quoting from the actual language of the Act, prohibited them from jestingly or profanely speaking or using the holy name of God or of Christ Jesus or the Holy Ghost or of the Trinity, which are not to be spoken, but with fear and reverence. Although the Act did not apply specifically to print matter, the folio text eliminates 57 instances of profanity that are found in the quarto, including the oaths, zounds, which is a contraction of God's wounds 9 times, and blood, which appears once in the quarto and is eliminated from the folio, which suggests that the quarto text may, in certain respects, be closer to the pre-1606 original of the play. And for an illustration, here's the 1622 quarto, and that example of blood is right at the beginning in Act 1, Scene 1. There it is. And then I'll put up the same lines in the 1623 folio, and you can see that it has been removed. So before we get into the synopsis, just want to, as I often do, identify some of the key characters in the play, make just a few quick remarks about them. Actually, I'm going to make quite a few remarks about the first one, Othello. Othello's race is so integral to his character that early stage actors performed the role in blackface. It's controversial today because blackface is associated with the racist caricatures of 19th century American minstrel shows, but actors like Charles Kimball, whom you see here, and Edmund Kean, they saw themselves as serious Shakespearean actors and played the role of Othello with the same tragic gravity and seriousness as they would have played any other Shakespearean role. Edmund Kean, whom you see here, was actually performing as Othello when he collapsed on stage in 1833. It was his last role. He died a few weeks later, and interestingly, in that performance, his son was playing the part of Iago. Not all white performers used blackface, however, and not all actors who played Othello were white. Here is Ira Aldridge, whom I talked about at the very beginning of this video, one of the early black Shakespearean actors. He began his acting career in the 1820s at the extremely important African Grove Theater, which was an all-black theater in New York City. But the racist atmosphere, cultural climate compelled him to immigrate to England, where he would become enormously successful, not just as an actor, but also as a theater manager. And you see him here in this picture in the part of Othello. We have a playbill from 1833, a British playbill, announcing his stage debut at the Theatre Royal Covent Garden. This was a major London theater at the time, playing the part of Othello. The advertisement calls him the African Roscius. Roscius was a celebrated actor in ancient Rome. And also, curiously, the playbill identifies Aldridge as a native of Senegal, so emphasizing his African ancestry rather than his American origin, because he was born in New York City, not in Senegal. So this is Paul Robeson. In the 20th century, Othello continued to be played by black and white actors. Almost a century after Aldridge's performance at Covent Garden, the actor Paul Robeson, whom you see here, really interesting man. He was a professional football player before he was an actor. He studied law. He got his start in theater playing lead roles in Eugene O'Neill's plays. And he became the first black actor to play the part of Othello on American soil. And that was in the 1940s. His acclaimed Broadway performance during World War II, the years 1943-44. That performance, to this day, that production holds the record for the longest Broadway run of a Shakespearean play. A couple more notable 20th century performances in film. The American actor and film director Orson Welles played the role in a 1951 film adaptation. You see the film poster for it there. That he also directed it. And the renowned British actor Laurence Olivier played Othello in a British production a decade later. He was actually nominated for an Oscar for this performance. Both actors, both white men, performed in blackface, which raises controversy when these films are screened today. The films have not aged particularly well. In 2021, a professor at the University of Michigan, for example, was briefly suspended for showing the Olivier film to his students. And boy, that created a firestorm. You can read about that on the internet if you wish. Interesting debate. So just going to add some more characters here. I got to put Iago up here opposite Othello, the Shakespeare's. I don't know. I think Richard III is in some way the ultimate Shakespearean villain, but Iago, he's right up there. He's also one of Shakespeare's most verbose characters. Only Richard III and Hamlet have more lines of dialogue than Iago does, and all of them, all three of those characters, are murderers. The actor that you see here, Edwin Booth, playing Iago, he looks pretty good in the role. I think looks pretty menacing there. Desdemona, Othello's wife. You see her here, performed by Gertrude Elliott. And then her father is important, Brabantio. And then Iago's wife, Emilia, played in this photograph by Lena Ashwell. And then there are two more men who are important. Cassio. I love this photograph of Cassio. This is the actor Henry Ainley playing Cassio. That outfit is something just wonderful. And then Iago's accomplice, Roderigo. So those are the characters that we're going to find ourselves talking about a lot in this video. As I sometimes do in this series, I put up an illustration of the play and give you an opportunity to try to figure out what scene is being depicted. This is Thomas Stothard's painting for the Boydell Shakespeare Gallery series which was engraved in 1799, published in 1799. If you want to pause the video and take a look, this one's a challenging one, I think. What's the scene being portrayed here? So I've identified it as Act 2, Scene 1, specifically lines 175 to 93. This is the scene of Othello's joyful reunion with Desdemona on Cyprus after their separate ships have been waylaid by the same storm that decimated the Turkish navy. Their pilots were better, I guess, and got them safely to Cyprus, and there they are being reunited. So Othello and Desdemona are pretty easy to spot. The other characters are a little more challenging. I think that must be Cassio there, because he greets Othello immediately upon his arrival. And then I think off to the side is Iago, although I think he looks a little too old. I think at one point he says he's 28 years old in the play, and that man does not look 28. But I'm fairly certain that's supposed to be Iago, looking very Judas-like there. And it's similar to the Romeo and Juliet painting in that video where Tybalt is off to the side, like this, kind of in the shadows. Very similar composition. I had a little bit of difficulty deciding on Roderigo, but ultimately, there's Emilia, Iago's wife, Emilia. And then I identified that individual. I'm not certain of my identification, but I think that could be Roderigo. He looks like he might have some money, and of course Iago is taking it. he keeps ripping off Roderigo throughout the play, and finally Roderigo gets upset about it and pushes the play towards its crisis. So I'll give a synopsis now of the play. The background image here, this is Mars and Venus by the Renaissance painter Titian, a Venetian, the god of war wooing the goddess of love. That seems appropriate to the themes of the play. The island of Cyprus, where much of the play takes place, was sacred to Venus in the ancient world. It's often identified as her birthplace, in fact. But in the Renaissance, it was also an island of significant strategic importance, both from a military and global trade perspective, and was conquered by the Turks, by the Ottomans in 1570, when Shakespeare was 6 years old. So we've got the 5 acts here, and this illustration, obviously that's got to be Iago on the right, and the wealthy gentleman Roderigo there on the left. Sort of a caricatural image, but I like it. All right, so Act 1. So Iago and Roderigo discuss their grievances against Othello. Roderigo loves Desdemona, but is heartbroken to learn at the very beginning of the play that she's just married Othello. Iago, meanwhile, is deeply offended by Othello's decision to promote Michael Cassio to lieutenant. Iago encourages Roderigo to make trouble for Othello by telling Desdemona's father, Brabantio, of their elopement. Believing that Othello, a mere soldier, a Moor, above all a black man, must have bewitched his daughter, Brabantio forms a mob to arrest him. At that same moment, the Duke of Venice has received intelligence that the Ottoman navy is maneuvering to capture the strategic Mediterranean island of Cyprus. Venice has a garrison there, so he summons Othello to receive orders from his war council. They're going to send him to Venice to defend it, or to Cyprus to defend the island. Brabantio accompanies Othello to this late night meeting, hopeful that the Duke will take his side. When he's questioned by the Duke, Othello denies the accusations against him and tells the story of how he and Desdemona fell in love. And Desdemona herself, she arrives shortly after, and she corroborates Othello's account. This completely satisfies the Duke, and he's like, okay then. And then he informs Othello that he must leave immediately to defend Cyprus against the imminent Ottoman invasion. Desdemona is granted permission to join Othello in Cyprus. We'll take a look at that scene in a little bit. Completely distraught by this turn of events, the woman that he has desperately sought to get her attention is now leaving Venice, and he threatens to kill himself. And Iago says, "Don't be ridiculous." He counsels him to have patience and to continue bankrolling his plan to redress both their perceived slights by using Cassio to cuckold Othello. Act 2 is in 3 scenes. So the action of the play at this point shifts from Venice to Cyprus and will remain there for the rest of the play, unlike Antony and Cleopatra, where we're all over the Mediterranean world. We get to Cyprus, and then that's we stay put from Act 2 through to the end of the play. A violent tempest has destroyed the Turkish fleet and threatened the Venetian ships sent to defend the island. It's kind of miraculous intervention. A lot of readers note the probable allusion to the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 88. Cassio's ship arrives first, followed next by Iago and Desdemona, and then finally Othello is the last to arrive. Iago observes what he interprets to be Cassio's flirtation with Desdemona, which he later uses to incite Roderigo's participation in a scheme to ruin Cassio without dirtying his own hands. Iago's very good at that, at getting others to do his dirty work. While the Cypriots celebrate the dissolution of the Ottoman threat, Iago manages to overcome Cassio's reticence to drinking alcohol. By the time Cassio reports for guard duty, he's thoroughly intoxicated, which is exactly what Iago intended. And Roderigo then seizes the opportunity to pick a fight, which quickly escalates into a brawl between Cassio and a Cypriot official, Montano, who gets hurt in the fight. Othello arrives, he breaks it up, he's angry, he is concerned that this disturbance will weaken weaken Cypriot confidence in his command of the island, so he dismisses Cassio as lieutenant. And so everything is going exactly as Iago could have hoped at this point. So to carry out his plan of cuckolding Othello, Iago advises Cassio to plead with Desdemona for her aid in restoring him to her husband's favor. After being knocked about by Cassio and running low on funds now, Roderigo threatens to return to Venice. This isn't going anywhere. I keep giving you money and to buy Desdemona gifts, and so that she'll take an interest in me, and it's not working. I'm going home. So Iago, once again, he urges patience and convinces Roderigo to stay. He needs Roderigo to stay. Act 3. So Iago's wife, Emilia, arranges a meeting between Cassio and Desdemona, and afterward, Desdemona follows through. She beseeches Othello to restore Cassio to his lieutenancy. Later, alone with Othello, Iago begins to carefully plant the suspicion that Desdemona and Cassio are having an affair. Angered and disturbed by Iago's insinuations, Othello dismisses him. He gets really angry. And then Desdemona walks in. She finds him agitated. She attempts to comfort him. And in that scene, she unwittingly drops a handkerchief that was a gift from Othello, a love token. Since Iago had earlier asked Emilia to steal this handkerchief, she retrieves it. Without either Othello or Desdemona noticing, and she hands it over to her husband, who then plants it in Cassio's room, hoping that he will find it and then use it, which in fact he does. Othello returns at this point in a rage and demands that Iago prove Desdemona's infidelity. And Iago begins basically making stuff up. He fabricates information that incriminates Cassio. We'll look at some of that later, and claims to have seen him in possession of Desdemona's handkerchief, which that's sort of the final straw, right? He's convinced that the two are having an affair, and he determines to be avenged. Iago offers to assist, and Othello says, "Thank you very much. I want you to kill Cassio." Later, Othello confronts Desdemona about the lost handkerchief. And indeed, she doesn't have it. She's lost it. And so this angers him, of course. It's just verification of what Iago has already told him. But Desdemona doesn't understand what's going on. She sees this as just Othello trying to distract their conversation from the more pressing matter of Cassio's position. This just enrages Othello. He storms off, and Cassio once again comes and says, "Hey, how's it going? What's the progress with Othello? I really need you to restore me to his favor." But she says this is not a good time. She remarks on Othello's troubled state of mind, which leads to speculation as to the cause. What's wrong with Othello? She decides to meet privately with him to try to get more out of him. While waiting for her return, Cassio is greeted by a character that just suddenly appears out of nowhere, Bianca, a prostitute with whom he has been sleeping since his arrival at Cyprus. In Cyprus, he shows her the lost handkerchief. He doesn't know whose it is. He just found it in his room, right? But she gets jealous, thinking it must be a gift from another woman. He reassures her that it's not, and he promises to meet her later. In Act 4, Iago continues to stoke Othello's jealousy. He has arranged a meeting with Cassio and encourages Othello to listen in. This is a typical Shakespearean device, the characters listening in on each other on stage. Wonderfully entertaining for the audience. The topic of their conversation is Bianca, but Othello, following Iago's suggestions, believes Cassio is describing his affair with Desdemona. His suspicions are confirmed when Bianca enters and angrily returns the handkerchief Cassio had given her the scene before. Bianca offers Cassio a chance to make amends, and he agrees to sup with her later that night. After Cassio leaves, now Othello is totally enraged, and he resolves to murder Desdemona at this point. And at this moment, an envoy from Venice, Lodovico, arrives with a message from the Venetian Senate ordering Othello to return immediately to Venice, perhaps owing to the sudden death of Brabantio, although we don't know about this until much later in Act 5, and appointing Cassio to serve in his stead as governor of Cyprus. Interpreting Desdemona's remarks as confirmation of her affair with Cassio, Othello strikes her, he hits her, and makes crude insults. This shocks Lodovico, this shocks everyone. Later, Othello interrogates Emilia, Iago's wife, who defends Desdemona's virtue, but he doesn't trust her, and he proceeds to accuse his wife of infidelity. Desdemona's devastated by this. She seeks the advice of Emilia and Iago, unfortunately, and they speculate about the origin of the vicious rumor perpetrated against her. After the women exit, Iago's confronted by Roderigo, who is really angry now that his personal expense and Iago's efforts on his behalf have not brought him any closer to Desdemona. He basically says it's time for you to put up. My patience has run out. Iago acknowledges that he has failed to this point to deliver on his promises, but informs Roderigo that Othello has been ordered to return to Venice, but that he likely will take Desdemona with him to Africa instead. And so, of course, Roderigo wants to be with Desdemona, so this is not good news for Roderigo. And the only way to prevent this from happening, Iago says, is for him to murder Othello's intended replacement as governor, Cassio. After hosting Lodovico for supper, Desdemona sinks into this profound singing melancholy, um, like other melancholy women who've been disposed of by their lovers in Measure for Measure and Hamlet. She's singing songs, and she and Emilia share their differences of opinion on marital fidelity and cuckoldry, and we'll take a look at those speeches a little later. Here's a painting of Act 5. This is a painting by William Salter, I think is his name. Typical romanticized Delaquasian style of the mid-19th century here, with Othello by Desdemona on her. She's obviously dead there. Her skin is turning blue, and that would be Emilia pointing the accusing finger at him. So Act 5. So Iago and Roderigo lay in ambush for Cassio, and in the ensuing melee, Cassio wounds Roderigo, and Iago severs Cassio's leg, but does not kill him. Concerned that Roderigo might expose his treachery, Iago decides to just go ahead and finish him off. Meanwhile, Desdemona defends her virtue one last time before Othello smothers her in her bed. Such a violent thing to do. I think of strangulation as just takes so much strength and force and stamina to do that to a person. Such a more violent really than using a weapon, in my opinion. Anyway, Emilia arrives and informs Othello that Roderigo is murdered, but that Cassio yet lives, which is not exactly what Othello wanted to hear. With her dying breath, Desdemona cries out one last time to Emilia from behind the bed curtains that she's murdered, but she does not say by whom, which is interesting. Othello confesses to the crime and excuses it on the grounds of Desdemona's adultery. Emilia, she refutes this. She says there's no way. But Othello points to her husband, Iago, as his witness, and Emilia had no idea. Iago arrives with Montano and Desdemona's uncle Graziano, and Iago admits to sharing his suspicions with Othello, but that Othello verified them himself with the discovery of Desdemona's handkerchief in Cassio's possession. Realizing that she's been cozened by her husband, Emilia exposes his treachery, and Iago stabs her and flees. Montano goes in pursuit of Iago. Othello is disarmed and guarded by Graziano. By the time Montano returns with Iago in custody, he now has Lodovico and Cassio with him, but Othello's procured another sword. Of course, he has a sword collection, and he stabs Iago with the sword, but he's unable to kill him, which is good because he says you're going to be tortured for all this, which is true. Lodovico presents letters taken from Roderigo's body confirming Iago's role in all of this from the very beginning, and Iago is sentenced to be tortured. Before Othello can be taken to prison, he stabs himself to death and collapses on the marriage bed with the bodies of Emilia and Desdemona. Okay, let's look at some scenes from the play. We'll start with Act 1, Scene 1, lines 5 through 63, and then I'm also going to talk here about Scene 3, Act 1, Scene 3, two parts, lines 312 to 323, and lines 361 to 382. Both those parts are speeches by Iago. These scenes and speeches give us important glimpses into Iago's scheming, Machiavellian character, his motives, and the philosophy that direct his actions throughout the play. In the first, in scene 1, he remarks on Cassio's promotion over him to the rank of lieutenant, which Iago believes Cassio doesn't deserve. Of Cassio, he says, mere prattle without practice is all his soldiership, he says. He goes on in this speech to talk about two types of men. He says, there are those who follow, the followers, who never get anywhere. He calls them duteous and knee-crooking knaves. And then there are those with ambition, who, trimmed in forms and visages of duty, he says, keep yet their hearts attending on themselves, and throwing but shows of service on their lords, do well thrive by them. Iago identifies himself with this second group. Not I for love and duty, he says, but seeming so for my peculiar end. I am not what I am, he says, which is of course true. Like Hamlet, he is not what other characters think he is, namely that he's honest. And that word, honesty, that is a word that gets used again and again. It reverberates throughout the play. The second scene, scene 3, starting at line 312, this is a really, I love this speech. It's my favorite speech by Iago in the whole play. It anticipates the rhetoric of Satan in Paradise Lost, actually. So here, Iago counsels Rodrigo, who's become suicidal and dramatic after discovering Desdemona's marriage to Othello and that they're leaving Venice for Cyprus. Iago emphasizes the power of reason over passion. He says, we have reason to cool our raging motions, our carnal stings, our unbidden lusts. Self-control is an important aspect of Iago's character. He uses it. He needs self-control to maintain his masks, to effectively and coldly orchestrate the ruination of other people. He says to Rodrigo, he says, "'Tis in ourselves that we are thus or thus. Our bodies are our gardens, to the which our wills are gardeners, so that if we will plant nettles or sow lettuce, either to have it sterile with idleness or manured with industry, why the power and corrigible authority of this lies in our wills." The second group of lines up there, 361 to 382, this is his first major soliloquy at the very end of Act 1. He's proud of himself. He's often proud of himself for the way he has successfully manipulated Rodrigo into letting him serve as a kind of middleman to supposedly to buy Desdemona's affections with gifts, which of course Iago is keeping for himself. But he also introduces in this soliloquy a new motive for his dislike of Othello. We get mention here of rumors that Othello has cuckolded him by sleeping with his wife Emilia. But even he admits that there's no evidence for it. It's something he only suspects. And he mentions this, and even Emilia refers to this rumor at one point later in the play. He also, in this speech, develops a plan to demote Cassio by convincing Othello that he's having an affair with Desdemona. He says, "The Moor is of a free and open nature that thinks men honest, that but seem to be so." Remember, Iago says, I am not what I am. And Othello can't penetrate through that to see the truth of Iago. We also get in this speech some of the infernal language that surfaces over and over throughout the play and really intensifies in the fifth act. This makes Iago into something of like a Satan or vice figure from the old morality plays. And this language, like I said, it continues throughout the play. In this speech, talking about his plan to destroy Othello, he says, "It is engendered. Hell and night must bring this monstrous birth to the world's light." So Act 1, Scene 2, lines 62 to 79, and then Scene 3, lines 52 to 188. Both of these passages involve Brabantio's accusation that Othello has used witchcraft on his daughter. She couldn't possibly love him, right? And then Othello explains how he fell in love with Desdemona, and really it's Brabantio's fault. And Desdemona comes in and corroborates all this. So like I said, Brabantio, he can't believe that his daughter would, by her own choice, fall in love with Othello. He's below her privileged social rank as just a soldier. He's significantly older than she is, we've been told. And of course he's a black man. And so all these things, he says, there's no way that she would choose him. So he must have used magic on her. And he's like, yeah, I did. I talked to her, and she likes my character. So that was the magic. Scene 3 is kind of a funny scene. Brabantio, again incensed by his daughter's elopement with Othello, pushes to prosecute Othello, and the Duke, it's very obvious that he's not going to let domestic matters interfere with state security. The Ottoman Empire is warring against Venice for control of the Mediterranean basin, so there's no way that the Duke is going to just imprison their best soldier. And so he listens, and Othello says, well, let me explain. And he gives an account of how he courted Desdemona. And it's completely earnest, it's legitimate. And once the Duke hears this, he shows really very little interest in Brabantio's complaint. Othello's unvarnished tale of his whole course of love, that's what he calls it. That's his unvarnished tale of his whole course of love, starts at line 128 and continues through 169. And it's all of Othello's adventures in exotic locations, exotic lands, with cannibals and sort of malformed men and wild escapes and so forth. And all of that sort of captivated Desdemona, who's been kind of shut in Venice her whole life. And so she finds this all very attractive and appealing, of course. And when he's finished, the Duke says, and it's really funny, this might be the funniest line in the play, he's finished and the Duke says comically, I think this tale would win my daughter too. And he basically tells Brabantio to accept the marriage and just get on with the more important matters that the Senate is having to deal with. He really has no choice once Desdemona herself arrives and gives a speech basically confirming Othello's account and expressing her love and loyalty to Othello. And in all of these scenes, Brabantio comes across as just another one of Shakespeare's imperious father figure types, like Aegeus in A Midsummer Night's Dream, or like Capulet in Romeo and Juliet, challenged by a daughter who sets her own course in love and marriage. Desdemona says, my noble father, to you I am bound for life and education. My life and education both do learn me how to respect you. You are the lord of duty. I am hitherto your daughter, but here's my husband. And so much duty as my mother showed to you, preferring you before her father, so much I challenge that I may profess due to the more, my lord. There's really nothing that Brabantio can say to refute this. And actually, we learn in Act 5 that after they leave Venice, he's heartbroken and dies. So Act 1, Scene 2, lines 245 to 271. This is more of Desdemona. This is her appeal to travel to Cyprus with Othello. It's a scene. It's a short scene, but it illustrates Othello and Desdemona's mutual love for each other. Building on that earlier speech, defending her marriage, she shows her undaunted love here by insisting on traveling with Othello to Cyprus on a military mission. It's a speech that shows strength. It shows initiative. It shows courage. Of course, faithfulness and devotion to Othello. And for his part, Othello respects Desdemona's proposal. One of his finest speeches, he accepts it. He says it's not because he wants the convenience of connubial gratification. He says it's not to, quote, please the palate of my appetite. He says he wants her to come to be free and bounteous to her mind. It's because it's what she wants. It's out of respect to her that he wants her to come along. And he reassures the Duke that her presence on Cyprus will not distract him from overseeing and safeguarding Venice's garrison on the island. If domestic pleasures prove a distraction, he says, let housewives make a skillet of my helm. I like that line. And in fact, that's exactly what's going to happen. Domestic matters are going to interfere with Othello's duties in Cyprus, even though the Turkish threat, has been negated by the storm. The play sort of turns from Othello as a public figure, as a military figure, as a governor, to his role as a husband, to his private life. Act 2, Scene 1, lines 213 to 295. Iago weaves a web to cuckold Othello by framing Cassio. So having just observed Cassio's warm but not improper courtliness toward Desdemona upon her arrival in Cyprus, and Iago said of that, he said, with as little a web as this will I ensnare as great a fly as Cassio. He often mentions webs and nets in his speeches. Iago convinces Roderigo that Desdemona is actually in love with Cassio, and that it's a matter of time before Othello's novelty wears off, before Desdemona gets bored and she starts looking elsewhere to gratify her sexual appetite. Iago's objective, of course, is to rouse Roderigo's jealousy too. You got to remember that Roderigo courted Desdemona long before her marriage to Othello, and he needs Roderigo. He needs him to be more willing to be his accomplice in sabotaging Cassio's career, and then later to frame him, and eventually he wants Roderigo to murder Cassio. Roderigo, to his credit, is incredulous at first about this idea that Desdemona is sort of secretly infatuated with Cassio, and Cassio's putting the moves on her. But Iago always knows what to say. He's like Richard III that way. He's one of Shakespeare's most rhetorically gifted villains, frighteningly adept at manipulating people's desires and emotional vulnerabilities. If Cassio is dismissed from his lieutenancy and sent back to Venice, he says, then you will have a shorter journey to your desires by the means I shall then have to prefer them. I think what he means here is that the gifts that Roderigo has given shall, he can pass them along to Desdemona, and they will be received a little more warmly. And then he continues that with Cassio out of the way, the impediments most profitably removed, without the which there were no expectation of our prosperity. Our prosperity. So there's a double sense of the word prosperity in this speech, meaning both Roderigo's sexual satisfaction on the one hand, and he also ironically means the wealth that he's managed to fob off of Roderigo. Act 2, Scene 3, lines. Actually, this scene, Act 2, Scene 1, lines 213 to 295. That's followed by one of Iago's longer soliloquies, and it's an important one. I almost neglected to talk about it. Iago has more soliloquies than any other character in the play. And most of them come at the ends of scenes, and they They tend to be somewhat expository. They sort of outline his plans. Many of them don't really delve into private feelings or internal conflicts or uncertainties or sort of deliberating moral questions. They're nothing like Hamlet's soliloquies, for example. Iago knows what he wants, and he knows what he's going to do to get it. If you want an example of one of these types of speeches, you can look at another one. 2 scenes, 50 lines or so after this, Act 2, Scene 3, 41 to 54. But this one, this particular soliloquy, doesn't really tell us much that's new about his plan to use Cassio to cuckold Othello, which is the topic of his earlier soliloquy. They already talked about it. But it does suggest that Iago has more complicated motives. Once again, he voices his suspicion that Othello has slept with his wife, Emilia. Again, no sound reason for this suspicion is ever shared with us, with the reader or the audience. But it's also clear in this speech that he still admires and respects Othello, who he acknowledges, quote, is of a constant, loving, noble nature. He also expresses conflicted feelings for Desdemona, which is really curious. He admits to harboring sexual desire for her, about which he's ambivalent and channeling it into his keen desire for revenge. He says, now I do love her too, not out of absolute lust, though peradventure I stand accountant for as great a sin, but partly led to diet my revenge, he says. His jealousy of Cassio, too, becomes more complicated and seems to go beyond just his promotion over Iago in military rank. At one point in this speech, Iago worries that maybe Cassio, whom he earlier described to Rodrigo as handsome, young, and having all those requisites in him that folly and green minds look after, he worries that Cassio may seduce his wife. So again, Iago is cuckolded in this speech. So of all Iago's soliloquies, this one is perhaps the most revealing. It's the one that lets us see past not just his public mask, but also deeper into the unkept corners of his private garden. We get a peek behind the wall of the cold, calculating reason that he had described to Rodrigo in Act 1. I think it's really his most fascinating soliloquy. So Act 2, Scene 3, lines 288 to 333. By this point in the play, Cassio has been successfully baited by Rodrigo. He got drunk. It's resulted in a fight with Montano that led to Cassio being dismissed as lieutenant. All, of course, according to Iago's plan. And here, now Iago is pretending to be friends with Cassio. He advises him how to restore himself to the good graces of Othello, mainly by pleading with Desdemona to argue on his behalf. Using the metaphor of bone setting, he says, this broken joint between you and her husband entreat her to splinter, and this crack of your love shall grow stronger than it was before. So bone mending, interesting choice of metaphor there. Unlike the last soliloquy in Act 2, Scene 1, this one, the soliloquy here is brimming with confidence. He's proud of himself. And he does something kind of unusual in Shakespeare's soliloquies. He directly addresses the audience, the theater audience. He says, how am I a villain? He asks provokingly. Of course, we're all disgusted with him at this point. He says, well, how am I a villain? He defends what he says. He says, basically, I'm trying to help the guy out. It's totally legitimate. But Iago achieves his selfish ends by doing as little wrong as possible. It's like he does just enough, even appearing to help those whom he intends to harm. He uses a paradox to describe this brand of villainy. He calls it the divinity of hell. And he explains it as follows. When devils will the blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows, And he goes on to explain how the rest of his plan will unfold. For whiles this honest fool plies Desdemona to repair his fortune, and she for him pleads strongly to the Moor, I'll pour this pestilence into his ear, that she repeals him for her body's lust, and by how much she strives to do him good, she shall undo her credit with the Moor. So will I turn her virtue into pitch, and out of her own goodness make the net that shall enmesh them all. Okay, Act 3, Scene 3. Long stretches here, lines 92 to 275, and then again 332 to 473. Long stretch of really intense dialogue. I think that this must be, for a Shakespearean actor, this scene must be one of the hardest to perform. It's so long. There's so much dialogue, and it's so intense, emotionally intense. I think it would strain the capabilities of just about any actor. Iago's goal in this scene is to, as it's been from the beginning, is to cuckold Othello, but now he's putting it into operation to convince him that his wife is an adulteress, but to do so in such a way that conceals his personal motives. And he accomplishes this by feigning uncertainty while at the same time baiting Othello's curiosity. He does it by playing up and then reiterating his loyalty and devotion. And it's really interesting how often both of them use the word love in this scene to describe their feelings for each other. The word honest, too. I mentioned this earlier in the video, but the word honest, some version of the word honest, appears 17 or 18 times at least in this scene, maybe more than that. It is used 4 times in just 3 lines at one point. You could look at lines 101 to 103 for that. It is a word, the word honest, that becomes an ironic epithet that's attached to Iago's name throughout the play. Honest Iago. Cassio refers to him as honest Iago at one point. And towards the end of the play, Othello calls him honest Iago. Just about every line Iago says, honest Iago says in this scene is just dripping with irony. For example, he says, men should be what they seem. Of course, Iago is not what he seems. He says, men should be what they seem, or those that be not, would they might seem none. That's lines 125 and 126. Most cleverly, Iago warns Othello against the very thing he is trying to incite in him. He says, oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. That cuckold lives in bliss, who, certain of his fate, loves not his wronger. But oh, what damned minutes tells he o'er, who dotes, yet doubts, suspects, yet soundly loves. Poor and content is rich, and rich enough. But riches fineless is as poor as winter to him that ever fears he shall be poor. Now, Othello responds to this by saying he has no reason to doubt Desdemona's virtue and will not be jealous without incontrovertible proof of her infidelity, which is, of course, what Iago wants to hear, because it gives him license now to warn of Desdemona's behavior without fear of rousing Othello's anger, or at least without fear of Othello's anger being directed against himself. It's safe for him to share his suspicion now, for as he says, he has no proof, and he manipulates Othello here with sly innuendos rather than bold accusations. Once he is given access to the garden of Othello's mind, he begins planting there the seeds of doubt, remarking on the loose reputation of Venetian women. This was a popular notion in Renaissance England. He reminds Othello that Desdemona's been deceitful in the past, keeping her marriage a secret from her father. And here he echoes Brabantio's warning to Othello back in Act 1, Scene 3, when Brabantio told Othello, look to her more, if thou hast eyes to see, she has deceived her father, and may thee. And Iago preys on Othello's insecurities by arguing that she's gone against nature in loving him. An older man. He's a black man, and that she may repent her decision later. And throughout all this, Iago elicits the language of courtship and love. He says it is his love for Othello that compels him to speak his mind. He says, I humbly do beseech you of your pardon for too much loving you. To which Othello replies, I am bound to thee forever. Iago leaves for a moment, and Shakespeare gives Othello a soliloquy that shows just how successful Iago has been up to this point. Happily, for I am black, and have not those soft parts of conversation that chambers have. Or for I am declined into the vale of years, yet that's not much. She's gone. I am abused, and my relief must be to loathe her. O curse of marriage, that we can call these delicate creatures ours and not their appetites. I had rather be a toad and live upon the vapor of a dungeon than keep a corner in the thing I love for others' uses. A short time later, now enraged by Iago's suggestions, he's like almost gone completely mad now. At one point, he goes into a trance. Othello confronts Iago, demanding ocular proof, he says, of Desdemona's adultery. He breaks here his earlier reassurances to the Duke that domestic affairs would not interfere with his duty to the state. He says, farewell the tranquil mind, farewell content, farewell the plumed troops and the big wars that make ambition virtue. Othello's occupation's gone, he says. Iago turns Othello's rage to his advantage by rebuking himself for being honest. Othello comes in and now he's mad at Iago. Why did you do this to me? Why did you give me all these terrible notions? Now I can't sleep. I don't trust my wife. How dare you do this to me? And Iago managed to turn this by rebuking himself for being honest, for allowing himself to be persuaded by Othello in the first place to disclose his suspicions, purposefully making Othello feel guilty for compelling him to reveal something he didn't want to reveal in the first place. O monstrous world, Iago says, take note, O world. To be direct and honest is not safe. And when you read this section yourselves, notice how the word honest forms a cluster in this part of their dialogue. To be direct and honest is not safe. I thank you for this profit, and from hence I'll love no friend, sith love breeds such offense. So this appeal brings Othello back to his side, and Iago begins to build a supposedly fact-based case against Cassio. He gives a false account of Cassio talking in his sleep in the midst of an erotic dream. And this, by the way, that's some of the most explicitly homoerotic description in all of Shakespeare. Iago's description of this dream. And there's a kind of homoeroticism even in this scene with Othello, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But perhaps most importantly, he plants the idea of ocular proof, the handkerchief, which Iago has by this point already planted in Cassio's room. Perhaps the most remarkable, and I was leading up to this just a second ago, the most remarkable and disturbing aspect of the entire scene is how the language of love and fidelity intensifies, like wedding vows, in fact, as Iago inflames Othello's jealousy and rage. At this point, at line 451, Othello is kneeling, and he says, my bloody thoughts with violent pace shall never look back, never ebb to humble love till that a capable and wide revenge swallow them up. Now, by yond marble heaven, in the due reverence of a sacred vow, I here engage my words. And Iago says, do not rise yet. And he kneels with Othello. And then he adds, witness, you ever burning lights above, you elements that clip us round about. Witness that here Iago doth give up the execution of his wit, hands, heart, to wronged Othello's service. Let him command, and to obey shall be in me remorse, what bloody business ever. And Othello says, I greet thy love, not with vain thanks, but with acceptance bounteous, and will upon the instant put thee to it. Within these 3 days let me hear thee say that Cassio's not alive. Iago says, my friend is dead. 'Tis done at your request. But let her, that is Desdemona, let her live. Damn her, lewd minx. Oh, damn her, damn her. Come, go with me apart. I will withdraw to furnish me with some swift means of death for the fair devil. Now art thou my lieutenant. And one wonders when he says that, is Iago now his lieutenant or wife? It sure does sound like Iago is replacing Desdemona in this speech and not Cassio. And then Iago follows that with this kind of till death do us part statement. He says, I am your own forever, he says. And that's how that exchange concludes. Scene 3. Act 3, Scene 4, lines 92 to 154. This is where Cassio renews his appeal to Desdemona, and the discussion shifts to Othello's troubling behavior. So Iago has advised Cassio to reach out to her to help restore him to favor with Othello. Again, that's just all part of his scheme. And here Cassio comes a second time to renew his appeal, his petition. And I actually start the selection of lines here immediately before his entrance, because I really like Emilia's comment about men. This is right after Othello confronts Desdemona about the lost handkerchief. He's really rough with her verbally, and she makes the mistake of turning the conversation to Cassio, and he storms off. And Emilia has these great lines. She says, "'Tis not a year or two shows us a man. They are all but stomachs, and we all but food. They eat us hungrily, and when they are full, they belch us." Wonderful lines. Emilia's character is really frustrating to me. She's quick, she's perceptive, she's pragmatical, much more so than Desdemona. And in some ways, their relationship, her relationship with Desdemona reminds me of the nurse's relationship with Juliet. Emilia has no illusions about men or marriage, and she talks of standing up to abusive husbands. And yet, she's deluded by her own husband until it's too late to alter the course of tragic events. She defers to him, and by stealing Desdemona's handkerchief, she's complicit in the plot that will end with Desdemona's murder. So later in the scene, Desdemona informs Cassio that Othello is troubled and unlikely to respond positively to her petition on his behalf. And this is followed by conversation about what might be causing his hostile, erratic behavior. Remember, Othello has not yet made a direct accusation that Desdemona has cheated on him. Desdemona, in fact, suspects that maybe it's something political behind it rather than some domestic trouble. She excuses his behavior even. And at one point, she even blames herself for her lack of understanding. She says, "Something sure of state hath puddled his clear spirit. And in such cases, men's natures wrangle with inferior things, though great ones are their object." So it's like he's just taking it out on me. You know, he's stressed out about something important, something sort of beyond the private sphere, and he's just, I'm just the target or the drum that he's beating on. Beshrew me much, Emilia. I was, unhandsome warrior as I am, arraigning his unkindness with my soul, but now I find I had suborned the witness, and he's indicted falsely. And Emilia says, she's a little skeptical of that. She says, "Well, pray heaven it be state matters, as you think, and no conception nor no jealous toy concerning you." And Desdemona says, "Well, alas the day, I never gave him cause." And Emilia says, "But jealous souls will not be answered so. They are not ever jealous for the cause, but jealous for their jealous. It is a monster begot upon itself, born on itself." So again, a little piece of wisdom from Emilia. Act 4, Scene 1, lines 75 to 135 and 167 to 197. This is the scene that finally pushes Othello over the edge. Iago sets up Cassio, engaging him in conversation about the prostitute Bianca, whom Cassio, by the way, treats with sexist ambivalence to preserve his reputation. But Iago is talking to him about Bianca to fool Othello into believing that he's sleeping with, that Cassio's sleeping with Desdemona. Iago's very, very clever in this scene at manipulating Othello's perceptions. He keeps Othello at a distance at first, so that Othello must rely entirely on his observation, Cassio's smiles, gestures, and light behaviors, Iago says. And then Iago only signals him to move in closer, close enough to actually hear what they're saying, only when he's certain that Cassio's verbal account of his relationship with Bianca will be misconstrued by Othello. And immediately following this exchange, and before the end of which Bianca appears and shows the handkerchief, which is adding further insult to Othello's perceived injury. So immediately following this exchange, Othello believes he has all the evidence necessary to condemn Desdemona. And yet several times in this scene, he nearly talks himself out of it. He says, "Oh, the world hath not a sweeter creature. She might lie by an emperor's side and command him tasks," he says. He also says she will sing the savageness out of a bear, and so forth. And every time his heart begins to soften, every time his passion ebbs, Iago is right there, quickly steering him back down the path of murderous rage, until finally it's Iago himself who suggests the appropriate method of killing her. Strangle her in her bed, even the bed she hath contaminated, he says. And of course, Othello likes that idea. And of course, that's what happens in the end. Act 4, Scene 2, lines 1 through 89 and 113 to 165. The play, Othello is well known for its religious language. This is a feature it shares with Measure for Measure, which scholars believe was probably written around the same time as Othello, maybe even back to back. And that language, that religious language, intensifies as Othello descends deeper into his jealous rage. In the first part of this scene, Emilia defends Desdemona from Othello's insinuations about her relationship with Cassio. But Othello, he doesn't trust Emilia anyway, so even though Emilia defends Desdemona, it doesn't really matter. And then he finally confronts Desdemona with his accusations, calling her a whore, in fact. And as Shakespeare ratchets up the emotions in this scene, the religious language begins to intensify. Othello says, "What art thou?" And Desdemona replies, "Your wife, my lord, your true and loyal wife." And Othello says, "Come, swear it. Damn thyself, lest, being like one of heaven, the devils themselves should fear to seize thee. Therefore be double damned. Swear thou art honest." Desdemona, "Heaven doth truly know it. Heaven truly knows that thou art false as hell," he says. And later in the scene, Othello alludes to the biblical figure of Job to describe the torment that Desdemona has set on him. "Had it pleased heaven to try me with affliction," he says, "had they rained all kinds of sores and shames on my bare head, steeped me in poverty to the very lips, given to captivity me and my utmost hopes, I should have found in some place of my soul a drop of patience. But alas, to make me the fixed figure for the time of scorn to point his slow and moving finger at." After he leaves, Desdemona has a 3-line soliloquy. It's her only one in the play. Her only soliloquy is just a few lines. That could be because Desdemona was played by a less experienced child, adolescent actor who couldn't carry long speeches. Maybe I'm just speculating. But in any case, then Iago and Emilia come in and try to comfort her. Iago, of course, feigns ignorance. And there's awful irony in Emilia's lines in this scene, where she's implicating some busy and insinuating rogue, some cogging, cousining slave, she says, in trashing Desdemona to win the favor of Othello, not realizing, of course, that insinuating rogue is standing right next to her. It's her husband. And I imagine this irony is especially acute for audiences in live performance. Iago says, "There is no such man. It is impossible." It's slightly humorous even when Emilia's language reaches such a pitch that even verbose Iago is made uncomfortable by his wife's language. She says, "The Moors abused, by some most villainous knave, some base, notorious knave, some scurvy fellow. Oh, heavens, that such companions thou'dst unfold, and put in every honest hand a whip to lash the rascals naked through the world. And Iago says, hey, take it easy. Speak within door, he says, which is, I think, a subtle indication of his guilt. This selection concludes with Desdemona seeking advice from Iago about how she might yet repair her relationship with her husband. Again, these are lines that were added to the folio text of the play. They weren't in the quarto. Some readers find her gestures and her language in this exchange with Iago frustratingly submissive and indulgent even towards Othello's abuse. She says, I ever did and ever will, though he do shake me off to beggarly divorcement, love him dearly. Unkindness may do much, and his unkindness may defeat my life, but never taint my love. Act 4, Scene 3, lines 56 to 98. The differences between Desdemona, the naive romantic idealist, and Emilia, the pragmatic realist, is very starkly drawn in this exchange, this dialogue between them. It seems that the scene is written really to elevate Desdemona's character, appealing to sentimental notions of love and marriage that have been under assault throughout the play. But Emilia's remarks, which remind me a lot of Chaucer's Wife of Bath, I think it's Emilia's remarks that appeal more to modern sensibilities. It is their husbands' faults if wives do fall, she says. Say that they slack their duties and pour our treasures into foreign laps, or else break out in peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us. Or say they strike us, or scant our favor, having in despite. Why, we have galls, and though we have some grace, yet have we some revenge. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell, and have their palates both for sweet and sour, as husbands have. What is it that they do when they change us for others? Is it sport? I think it is. And doth affection breed it? I think it doth. Is it frailty that thus errs? It is so too. And have not we affections, desires for sport and frailty, as men have? Then let them use us well, else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us so. None of this speech, as I pointed out earlier, is present in the 1622 quarto. And again, I think it makes Emilia's character a little baffling because of her role in procuring the handkerchief for Iago, stealing it, she later confesses, out of a misguided sense of wifely duty, refusing even to question her husband's motive in desiring it. Finally, we'll talk about two speeches, Othello's last two long speeches anyway, Act 5, Scene 2, lines 255 to 275 and 332 to 349. These two speeches, they're the last ones before he kills himself, reflecting on his past life and the enormity of his crime. The first speech is designed to show how far Othello has fallen, from battlefield hero to domestic abuser and murderer. Once again, notice the intensity of the religious language with echoes of the infernal finale of Marlowe's Faustus. Faustus, who of course flies from his perdition rather than inviting it, as Othello does here. And it echoes the older morality plays on which both Faustus and Othello draw. O ill-starred wench, pale is thy smock. When we shall meet at count, this look of thine will hurl my soul from heaven, and fiends will snatch at it. Whip me, ye devils, from the possession of this heavenly sight. Blow me about in winds, roast me in sulphur, wash me in steep down gulfs of liquid fire. O Desdemon, dead Desdemon, dead. Readers have pointed out that Othello contains the word hell and Desdemona the word demon, and that becomes really clear at the end of that soliloquy. The final speech emphasizes once again the disparity between his former military glory and his immediate circumstances of domestic terror and disgrace. It is especially appropriate and affecting that the fatal wound he inflicts on himself for the latter cause He describes in terms of the heroism and sanctioned state violence of the former. Set you down this, he says at the very end, and say besides that in Aleppo once, where a malignant and turbaned Turk beat a Venetian and traduced the state, I took by the throat the circumcised dog and smote him thus. And then he strikes himself. And thus he brings his life to a bloody period, telling the same kind of story that not long before, but in very different circumstances, opened to him a world of kisses. And with that, we'll wrap up this video on Othello.